how old any of you all are, and if you recognize that song. It was a pretty throwback to a long time ago. It's Will Smith, before he was even really Will Smith. It was DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, and Parents Just Don't Understand. And play that as a little bit of, because it's kind of some fun music, but also as a little bit of humor for us, because I'm sure if you are parenting teenagers, there's an element of that I'm sure your teens feel that way about you, and you are going, oh my goodness. They think we don't know anything. So just welcome you guys. My name is Jason Benson. I am the founder and president of LoveMoves.Us, and we started the organization not quite 4 years ago. We're coming up on 4 years in June. I also have been down to Texas Christian University's Institute for Child Development for their TBRI practitioner training, and have taught that class and led others in TBRI. I'm also a former youth pastor and worked with a lot of teens in that regard as well. I want to introduce a couple of special guests with us. First, I want to introduce Carrie DeRuyter. If you, depending on the view that you have and how accustomed you are to Zoom, if you're on the speaker view, you're probably only seeing me right now. There is a grid view where you can see kind of everybody there, but Carrie, if you don't mind unmuting yourself so you can just talk or say just a couple things about yourself so people can see you and know who you are.
Okay, well, my name is Carrie, and my husband and I got into the world of international adoption back in 2013 when we were asked to host an orphan from Ukraine for just a couple weeks. It was just a program that a friend was involved with, and they needed one more host family. And we ended up with a adorable little 12-year-old from Ukraine who was perfectly fit into our family. We have 3 older bio kids who at the time were like 15, 18, and 20. And so we were like, oh dear, we're in trouble here, because everybody was like, oh, he's so great and he's perfect, So anyways, fast forward to 2015 when we brought him home from Ukraine, and 6 months later when we started dealing with, oh boy, rage, trauma coming out of our ears. We didn't know about abuse, neglect, fetal alcohol syndrome, PTSD, and a whole bunch of other alphabet soup letters behind his name. So he is now 18 and just graduated from high school, special ed. And it's... and
you have how many kids, Carrie?
We have 4 now.
4 kids,
we have
3 bio.
3 bio.
One adopted from Ukraine.
One adopted from Ukraine.
He has fetal alcohol syndrome.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Kristen Rojas thank you, Carrie. I appreciate you sharing that. Kristen Rojas is also joining us. Really excited to have both of our guests here sharing with their experience in parenting teens, and from slightly differing perspectives. Like I said, Carrie with the international adoption side. Kristen is a foster parent and a social worker. Her and her husband, Iggy, have no biological kids, but have fostered many kids and have several teens living with them right now. What else can you share with us, Kristen? You can unmute yourself there and just give us a 1 minute, like, what else can you share about that?
Hi, I'm Kristen, and yeah, my husband and I have been foster parents for 4 years. We've had 10 kids in our home. We currently have 4 boys, a 5-year-old, and then a 13, 15, and 17-year-old. We've had 6 other kids before them, mostly teenagers, just because that's typically what we have gotten calls for. We had our first 16-year-old boy we had for about 14 months, and then he went home to his mom. Our second 16-year-old boy we had for 3 months, and then he moved with his dad. Actually, we had a 17-year-old girl before everybody, but she only stayed with us for about a month, and then she kept running away, so the agency actually moved her. Then we had our third teenage boy came at 16, and he left at 19, and he struggled with a lot of different things. I'm still very close to him, but he just doesn't live here anymore. And then after him came another 16-year-old boy who is still with us, and he's going to be 18 in September. And then his 11-year-old brother moved in about a year and a half ago, but he just turned 13. And then we got a 15, our last son that we have right now is 15, and he moved in February. Like Jason said, I'm also a school social worker. So I've worked in the school setting as a social worker for 8 years. And before that, I worked in a high school as a live-in residential counselor for 5 years. I also lived in Honduras for 1 year at an orphanage, volunteering with kids, obviously, who were in the orphanage. And I worked primarily with the kids who were 12 to 18-ish.
Awesome.
So, yeah,
awesome.
that's me.
Thank you, Kristen. Appreciate that.
Good job.
I invited both of these moms here to share a little bit about their experience, because I know both of them pretty well, and know how they have some of the challenges that they've dealt with and how they have been effective in being a connected parent, implementing trauma information into their parenting and taking that into consideration. And so bringing that approach and being effective with that, I wanted them to share some of their experience and perspective with you. First thing I wanted to ask you guys both, like real quick, one thing, what's been your biggest struggle in parenting a teenager?
I mean, I can answer first. I think probably just the fear that like we just don't have a lot of time, and it feels like we have so much work to do, so much to catch up on, especially for kids who come a little bit older, and they're old already. Like we just don't have a lot of time with them until they go out into the real world.
Carrie,
So I guess I'm sorry. I guess to say the fear that we won't accomplish enough, as much as we can, make enough progress before they leave.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. And on the other side of that, we've adopted Victor, and he's 18, and last week he was suicidal. So like we have this, like, today we can't breathe. Yes. Yesterday was awesome. So we have like this massive range of emotions going on every single day, like sometimes every minute. And so like we just staying connected is sometimes very difficult with an older teen, because you want to, wring their neck sometimes. And sometimes, that you overreacted to something, and it's just like my reaction to everything makes such a huge difference, because we had to completely change our parenting from what we did with our other kids, because we did not parent them at all like we have to parent Victor.
Good. Thank you. Has there been one thing specifically with regard to your approach in your trauma-informed care of your children? Has there been one thing specifically that you feel like is kind of your go-to, a specific, in your toolbox, so to speak, of something that you feel like you just consistently have found to be very helpful in your approach in parenting with them?
I think just as a gut reaction, time and space. So as much as you might want to address something, I feel like I always need to just take time and space before I address it.
So kind of on, in thinking about specifically TBRI, where, coming back to my background and stuff, that would be a lot of your own self-awareness and your own regulation. Is that kind of what I'm hearing from you, is like just kind of being aware of maybe how they're triggering you and needing to just kind of reset maybe, or take some space on that?
Yeah, I think it's there's both sides to that. Number one, yourself being able to reflect on yourself and making sure that you're calm before you're responding, but also giving the child, the kid, the teenager time too, because if an issue comes up and it needs to be addressed, it's usually never best to address it in the heat of the moment.
Okay. Carrie, how about you? What's been kind of your go-to?
Mine are kind of more basic needs, because Victor grew up half of his first 13 years in an abusive situation, and half of less than half in that abuse and neglect situation, and half in orphanages. And so his basic needs are food sometimes, and so in order to keep him regulated, sometimes we just have to say, what is one thing on the whole world, in the whole world, that if I go get you, will you eat right now? Because I know that you need to be regulated right now. And if he says watermelon, I don't care if it's the middle of the winter and watermelon's going to cost me $9. I'm going to go find a watermelon. And so, it's just that kind of thing, but also playfulness is our go-to. We play games and video game. My husband has been a rock star. He has learned every video game and Yu-Gi-Oh game there is. And so that was our connecting from the very beginning. It was board games. It was 6 different versions of Monopoly. And so now, and then it was video games and cards. And so that was just our way of connecting. And we still do. They're out there playing Yu-Gi-Oh right now. So
there you go. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. I don't know if any of you guys can find the option here within Zoom. You can like raise a hand or give a thumbs up, it'll put a little icon in your screen for us. Just kind of make it a little bit more interactive. There's some options there, or even a reaction down the bottom menu bar. But I'm guessing that many of you would describe some of the biggest problems that you see relating to the behavior of your children. How many, could say that? Give me a thumbs up, either on your screen or clicking one of the reactions or anything like that. Anybody feel like that is definitely something that has been a big struggle? We're going to get to some of the correcting and the behavioral things in a minute, but one of the things that I want to first focus on, because when we talk about parenting our teens, every parent I've ever talked to who has questions about this and what to do and stuff, it's always, we all as parents want to know, what can we do to fix this, right? How can we correct this behavior? And when we talk about trauma-informed parenting, it's really peeling back the layers, and it's not so much looking at the surface of the behavior, but what's driving that behavior, what's underlying that, and pushing that behavior that we're seeing to the surface. There's something that's driving that, something underlying in there, and so we have to kind of be a detective in some of those things and figure out what's going on, what are they feeling. They don't always share those things. But first and foremost, before we can correct, we really need to connect with our kids. And so, Carrie, you just mentioned that. I mean, that's one of the things I've been in awe about with you and Mike and with Victor, has just been the lengths that you have gone to build that connection with him, to bring about that felt safety in ways that I'm guessing are not necessarily something that you're like, well, I love to play Yu-Gi-Oh, or however you even say it, like, this is how I want to spend my evening, is playing this card game with my son. But that's been something that he's really been into. And so, I know Mike specifically has really taken the approach of like, all right, this is what we're going to do. To connect with him. And you mentioned also some of the video games and stuff. How do you connect or play with your kids and form that attachment that they need? Because that's really where it comes from, is that play, right? The connection, the attachment that they need comes through that play. When the things that they're into you think are just dumb, like you don't even like them. Like, how do you do that?
You have to learn to like them. If you can find one thing that they like, and then you just do your research, you figure it out. I can't play Yu-Gi-Oh to save my life. I don't understand anything about it. I have tried, and Victor's like, Mom, you should just stop trying because you don't get it. I'm like, I know. And so like, but Mike took it on himself to learn the game for him. And he has a sister and a brother-in-law who are out there right now playing with him too, because they took it on themselves to also learn the game for Victor. And so, at first it was, Candyland or Connect Four, and simple stuff that we could all do. But games we have found have brought about more laughter, and laughter just dissolves all the problems for a little while. And it makes his brain more rational to even comprehend maybe so do you remember when that happened earlier today? Like, what really happened? And then he'll be like able to actually process that, because we gave it some time and we didn't make him talk about it right in the time, in the moment.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Sure. Good. Kristen, talk to me about, when we talk about connecting and you talked about leaving space and stuff, what are some things that your kids do that have triggered you emotionally? And how have you kind of developed that self-awareness to recognize that and do something about that, so that you don't react, but that you can respond appropriately?
I think things that trigger me are probably similar to things that trigger most parents, like just blatant talking back, being rude and disrespectful. For me, a huge trigger is cussing in front of our 5-year-old, or acting kind of, I guess, out of control in front of the little one. And I don't really mind cussing, to be honest, but not when it's in front of the 5-year-old. And actually, not too long ago, I just had a situation where when my 19-year-old was still at home. Actually, he was still 18 at the time. But he made so much progress in his behavior and his mental health. And he was doing so well. He didn't really cuss at all. He was generally respectful, but shortly before he moved out, and he just was having a bad day. And he said, what the F? And he said the F word. And I looked at him, and it was an accident, but he was slightly agitated. It was an accident. And he goes, oops. And then he said, you know what? Never mind. I can say whatever the F I want. And actually said it. And then he said F, 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 F all in a row. And it just majorly triggered me. Like, you're not going to sit here and talk like that. But then I was like, well, what am I going to do about it? He's 275 pounds and 6'5". Like, I can't pick him up and carry him to the other room. There's nothing I could do. And he sat there and just stared at me in what seemed like just like willful disobedience and like complete disrespect. And my 5-year-old was sitting right there listening. And so, that's the type of situation where I wanted to say, get out of here, get out of the house, or, do a lot of things that would not have helped. So I had to take a deep breath, picked up my 5-year-old and said, we're going to go outside and I'm going to come back and address this later. So went outside, had the conversation with the little one. We don't talk like that. Big brother's really upset right now and he's not making good choices. So we're going to address that later. And later, after I put the little one to bed, and, I have a 13-year-old too. And I also was concerned that the 13-year-old would think, hey, that's how teenagers act. I didn't want him acting like that because he doesn't have that type of struggle. So I waited. And after nobody else was around, so we could save face, then went back and had that conversation. How do you think that made me feel? How do you think that made me feel for you to say that? And he was calm. Enough time had passed so he could be a little more rational. And my biggest one, he likes games too. So none of my other teenagers like games, but he likes games. So sometimes we can, connect over a game. He's also a big physical toucher. He really likes hugs and pats on the back and stuff like that. So he, is fairly easy to connect with when it comes down to it. So after we were able to connect, and then we were able to have that conversation, and it went so much better. He said he was sorry. And he ended up going to the 13-year-old and apologizing for acting that way. We don't talk to parents like that in this house. That was a mistake. I shouldn't have done that, which was huge, really big deal.
Sure. Yeah. No, good illustration there for sure for us to learn from, because the heat of the moment can be, for both sides, right, can be really difficult.
Yeah, and can I just interject a little bit, just a little bit more? It's I just want to acknowledge it. It's really hard when you have other kids because the other kids sit there and stare at you like, what are you going to do about that? Like, you really going to let him talk to you like that? And it's so hard to not be like, don't talk to me like that, and engage in that in a power struggle right then and there, because you know, you want to assert your authority and make sure the kids understand that you're in charge, but really it's not going to help, and you are able to have just an effective of a conversation later, because my 17-year-old was there too. My 15-year-old didn't live here at the time, but I did go back and have conversations with them also and say it's not appropriate, and I am addressing this with him. And so they were able to still, I think, respect the fact that the behavior was addressed, and we restored it. He restored it later. It just is not in that moment. And in that moment, you feel like you lose control, but you really don't. You're just saving it for later.
Just putting it off. Yeah, putting it off.
I have something
yeah.
on the topic of cussing, because every teenager goes through that phase, right? We know this. What we have found, we don't really cuss in our house either, but what we found is not giving into the shock value of it. Because if they start cussing and you go off on them, they're going to cuss more. But if you're like, oh, okay, you know, so one time I just started cussing back, like, and he went, you can't talk like that. I was like, oh, and you can, but you're a grown-up. You're not supposed to talk like that. So we had this like back and forth banter about it, and he was so shocked that I went back, you know, with it in kind of a playful manner, that it was just like, it ended up being hilarious because he's never heard me swear before. And so it was just kind of like, you just gotta take it and go, and then talk about it later. Like Kristen said, that's such wise advice, is never try to talk about it in that moment, because neither one of you are regulated. So
good stuff. Yeah, we'll get to some more of that with the correcting and responding to that, I hope, here in a few minutes. One of the things that came to my mind when I was thinking about this in my time in youth ministry specifically, that a mentor of mine had said to me was that, you know, these kids need to know how much you care before they care at all about how much you know. You know, or what you're going to teach them, or what you're trying to do with them, or correct them, or they have to know beyond a shadow of a doubt how much you care before they care at all about what you have for them. And that can be really, really hard depending on how old these kids are and when they came to you. That can become more and more difficult. And I think when we have that in the back of our minds, that everything that I do, every correction, every connection, anything I'm doing to try and help empower this child is all coming from a place of, I want them to know how much I care about them. And it's not this, like, you know, you said, Kristen, this power struggle, this getting into it back and forth, can make a big difference. Because, you know, Carrie, you mentioned me just the other day, we were talking about maintaining that connection with your child even as they get older, because of fears of abandonment. And so when you talk about, you know, what's happened to them in their past, and this underlying, you know, again, we talk about the underlying, what's driving the behavior and stuff, that we don't always necessarily see that they may be feeling or be, you know, having these triggers of emotion, of fears of abandonment. And so knowing that, you know, we're never going to leave them, that we care about them no matter what, is essential for them to really begin to lay the foundation for that correction, right? We've got to lay that foundation of connecting, that they know we care, before the correcting will ever really begin to make a difference. And so we can correct and try and, you know, toe the line and try to, you know, go with this strict adherence and obedience to things, but that can be futile. And be really difficult. I want to talk about for a second, going along those lines with where our kids are at and our expectations, and that, you know, how have you had to adjust your expectations when it comes to the child's behavior? This is for either one of you.
Expectations are very low. Very low.
Why is that? I mean, you're saying that. Why? Like,
I know. It's because our kids are generally not going to be typical kids. If you've raised typical kids, if you tell them to go make their bed and clean their room, they're going to go make their bed and clean their room. If you tell my son to go make his bed and clean his room, he's going to get in his room and he's not even going to remember what I told him to go do. And if he does remember what I told him to do, he's just plain not going to do it. He's going to like pick something up and start looking at it. And then he's going to say, oh, I should go do this. Or, and so just tonight, he just finished high school and his teachers were like, we're going to surprise Victor and drive by. And I was like, okay. So we planned this, like, we're going to be outside. We're going to be ready for this. And he went for a walk. 5 minutes before all the teachers were going to drive by, he wasn't home. And I called him, I'm like, can you please come home? Only if you tell me what the surprise is. And I was like, somebody's going to be here to see you. Oh, that's so lame. I'm so not going to be there. So he came home and he was super angry that we didn't tell him what was going to happen. And he walked in the house and he wouldn't come out. And I was like, I can make this ruin my whole night, or I can just go greet every teacher. And so we greeted the teachers by ourselves. And it was very disappointing, but that was just because that's how life is. You can't just expect things. Our daughter got married 3 months ago and he wasn't at the wedding. And because he was on his way there and just couldn't do it. So you just have to like not get caught up in the disappointment of the everyday things.
Sure. Yeah.
I want to just build right off what you just said. I think that that's a perfect example of, a kid who just can't handle something. Obviously he didn't go out there probably because he was very anxious, or nervous, or, whatever, like Jason was talking about, that underlying behavior, that underlying feeling behind the behavior. And I think that it's so important to remember, when our kids are not meeting our expectations, it's because something is getting in the way. They can't. And our kids are not just being defiant or angry or disrespectful because they don't care and, they're jerks. It's because they can't. Either there's some type of mental health issue under there, like anxiety that we can't see, or, even deeper, bipolar disorder or a trauma trigger that we don't know. There's always something underlying that we can't see. So when our child is not meeting our expectations, we have to lower our expectations, because we have to acknowledge that it's not that they can't. It's not that they won't. It's that they can't. And when kids can be successful and do well, they do, because, doing well and meeting expectations is preferable for everybody, for every single one of us. Everybody would rather, be praised and make people proud and make people happy and, do what's expected to us than not. I think it's important to remember also that, and everyone's probably heard this on this call, our kids' chronological age is not congruent most of the time with their emotional age. And our kids go back and forth. My big boy, he was 19, but emotionally, a lot of the time he acted like a 10-year-old. And just because a child can be mature and successful in one day in one situation doesn't mean the next day in the same situation they're able to be successful as well. Because we don't know, how they slept the night before, or what thing might have triggered them. It could be something as seemingly insignificant as a smell. Sometimes a smell or something subconscious that they don't even realize could get in the way and cause that regression that we don't even know. So I see somebody typed, what is the difference between can't and not capable and willful disobedience? And I think that, I follow a professional named Ross Green. If you haven't heard of him, I highly recommend checking him out. He has a website called Lives in the Balance, and his big tagline is kids do well if they can, meaning 100% of the time kids are doing the best they can given their circumstance, their past, and anything that's going on in the present. And if they're not doing well, it's because something is in the way. And it could be those basic needs that Carrie was talking about before, like maybe they need a snack, maybe their blood sugar is off, maybe they're hungry, maybe they're thirsty, maybe they're tired. Or it could be something more serious like, anxiety. They need some space to settle down, to calm down, or, their hormones are unbalanced and they're struggling with depression in that moment. But it's our job, like Jason said, as the detectives to kind of figure out what that is. It sometimes feels like it could feel like we're being manipulated when it comes down to it. But, we also have to step back and look at that. Like manipulation is kids' survival skill. If they're manipulating us, it's because they're trying to get a need met and they don't know how else to do it. Sure. So again, it's our job to step back and say, this is not how we meet that need. If you need this, this is how you ask. If you need time and space, you don't go up to your room and slam your door. You say, I need space, and you walk away. And that can be applied to anything. We have to teach them how. I know with our 19-year-old also, my husband kind of struggled with that too. Like he just doesn't care. He's being, he wants you to do it. He's being lazy. He's manipulating you, because one of the ways I connected with him was by making his lunch. And, he was a senior in high school and I made his lunch every single day. But he never had anybody do that before. And could he have done it? Could he have made his own lunch? Sure, he could have. But, that goes back to like pouring into our kids and connecting with them, which I'm digressing a little bit there. So I'll stop.
No, but all good stuff, all good points. And, when I think about lowering the bar and adjusting your expectations of your child, Kristen, you and I talked the other day about some of the things that I've impacted me when I heard you say, specifically with one of your kids who I remember had been on drugs and missing school and getting in trouble with the law and all kinds of crazy stuff. And we met and you were talking about well, hey, but he's at least going to school and he hasn't done drugs in the last 6 days, or I don't even remember exactly what the specifics were. But I thought man, you've really lowered that bar to where he needed it. It wasn't this perfection. You weren't expecting perfection from him. You adjusted that bar to where hey, let's not doing drugs is a big win right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big win. Not attending school every day and getting A's. It's getting to school and not doing drugs. Am I saying that? Am I remember that fairly accurately for you?
Yeah, absolutely. He struggled significantly with addiction, and he did go through a period where his drug levels were dropping, and every drug test that was slightly lower, we had to celebrate that. It was a big deal. It wasn't as high as it was before. And he graduated high school last May, which was a huge achievement. There were some times where the school he did end up going to an alternative school, and the school would call, and I was like, but he didn't throw anything, he didn't hit anybody, he didn't walk out of the school, and they're like, no. And I'm like, thank God, tell him he's doing an excellent job. Tell him I'm so proud of him. And there was one time very close towards the end of the year, and I'm sure he was having a lot of anxiety about the year being over and not knowing what was going to happen after high school. That's scary for any kid. And he called me because he was very dysregulated and very angry. Someone walked out of his classroom and slammed the door behind them, slammed open the door, and he was sitting there and it bounced off his shoe and it triggered him, and he got up and he got all worked up and he went to the crisis room and he was pacing and he was calling and he called me, and he said, I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave. I'm going to walk out of the school. Sorry, those are my dogs. I don't know what they're barking at. And I said, if you are going to leave the school, you need to do so respectfully. Take a deep breath. Don't cuss at anybody. Don't yell. Don't storm out. Just tell them that you need to leave for your own well-being, and do so calmly. And he did. And then the school called me and they said he left. And I said, how was his state when he left? How did he act? And they said he was calm and he said that he had to go. So we told him, the school actually ended up telling him that it was fine. They said, if you have to go, then go. But he walked out of school, which normally you would think that's not cool, but it could have been a lot worse. And that actually was progress for him because he was able to communicate his needs.
Sure, sure. And recognizing that sometimes like kids getting up and walking out of class or walking out of school or whatever, they are trying to get a need met. They didn't do it appropriately, but instead of us looking at that behavior of, oh, you left school or you left class, like figuring out what triggered that, why did they need that? Like that's where we need to go as parents and help our school and our teachers and our, the administrators there understand, like, hey, there's something else going on here. Yes, they broke that rule, but let's figure out what's underneath there. Yeah, I appreciate you addressing that question on, the line between, can't versus willful disobedience. And I always tell people, if you're wondering, then you need to veer towards the side of can't, like that they literally cannot do this. And if you keep going there and you feel like you shouldn't have to, and you don't want to as a parent, but if you keep going on that side, veering towards the side of they can't, eventually, I believe you begin to see a change where it does become, and you can recognize the difference of, oh, no, this is willful here. It becomes very clear. If it's not clear, you got to go towards the can't. I've seen that with my own daughter in terms of just how, we formed the connection where we felt like there wasn't it was a can't for a long time. And then it's become this, no, this is willful. I think you start to see those things. You mentioned the nutrition side of things, and Carrie, I know you guys have really made some adjustments and lowered the bar in terms of nutrition and empowering your son with regard to knowing that food and water and nutrition, those rest, all those things play a huge role in how our kids feel and what kinds of behaviors then come out of that. And you've seen your child really struggle with food and nutrition, and how have you been able, to not make that a battle, but make the adjustments necessary just so he'll have food and water or something in his belly to, be able to regulate his behavior?
We just made a conscious choice early on to not make that a battle, because we know that we visited his orphanage and the kids all went down for dinner and we're back up in like 5 minutes. And I was like, what did you eat? And he was like, borscht, which is soup. And I'm like, are you full? He's like, full? I don't, no, no, we don't get full here. And so, we consciously realized that food was always, he's never stolen food. He's not like, some kids like hoard or steal food. Victor just eats a lot of it. Like he would go through 10 pounds of apples in 3 days. He just, and so we just kept buying apples, and then all he would eat was hot dogs. So we bought hot dogs, and then all he would eat was ramen noodles. And so we were like, cheap, and now he's on to spaghetti. It's just like, it's just random. Wendy's chicken sandwiches every single day. It was like, gotta have Wendy's crispy chicken. And so it was just like, but because we know that food is like the path to regulation with him in so many ways, we just are like, he's, we're surviving. We're surviving, and it's not going to become a battle.
And in a lot of ways, I mean, that sounds to me a lot like what we would see in behaviors of like toddlers in terms of food, right? Yeah. I mean, if you have a toddler, we've got one that's just turned 6, so not really a toddler so much anymore, but they kind of go through these phases where it's like, this is all they want to eat and that's all they will eat. And it's a lot of kind of those simplistic foods, hot dogs and chicken fingers or chicken sandwiches or something like that, spaghetti. And it's
I remember my pediatrician saying, eventually they'll get all of the food groups in there. I'm like, it's true. So
And he still has grown an absolute ton from where he was when he came to you,
Yeah.
despite maybe not getting the perfect nutrition from well-balanced meals all the time. Like, it was just getting him what he's going to eat and letting him eat.
Hmm. Yep. Yep. Hygiene has always been a struggle. Oh, the battles we've had over brushing teeth and taking a shower. It's like, just please just brush your teeth once a day, maybe. And it's so frustrating, but it's just not ever been in his normal realm of life. And so to get him to that point is just so difficult that yeah, you really have to be careful about what you're going to battle over. And, you know,
How have you seen, or what are some examples of maybe your child struggling with some felt safety needs that didn't maybe necessarily look on the surface or right away like it was felt safety, or something that just looked odd in a different way, but really at the core of it, it came down to this was a felt safety issue?
I would have to say, if you want recent examples, well, this wasn't so recent, but on his very first day of high school, he saw a fight in the lunchroom. And from that day on, he was battling in the lunchroom every single day. It was a struggle in the lunchroom, and we couldn't figure out why. And finally, he said, these kids got into a fight, and it's not safe in there. And I was like, he wasn't in the fight. He wasn't anywhere near the fight, except for that he was in the cafeteria at the same time that it happened. And so he stopped feeling safe in the cafeteria. And so it's like, okay, but it took us a long time to figure that out, and a lot of different, like, we don't know what happened. He was recently at work. He was working for UPS and unloading trucks, and he heard of another employee that he didn't know got hurt. And so from that day on, UPS could do nothing right because they didn't care about their employees. And it was like he couldn't see the other point of view, that perhaps the employee did something to cause himself to get hurt. He couldn't see anyone else's point of view except for his own. And so he didn't feel safe from that day on. And so it takes a lot of investigative work to find out maybe why they don't feel safe.
Sure. Yeah. We've only got a few minutes left. I want to get into some of the correcting and some of the questions that people have, specifically as it goes to behavior and stuff. If you've been to the Empowered to Connect conference, or you've learned some of the TBRI things or seen any of the videos, a lot of them they demonstrate with little kids. And so a lot of questions I get is like, well, how does this apply to teenagers? How does this work? Or how do you do that with teenagers? Like they do this nurture group, and you do a Band-Aid activity, and you give and receive care. You practice the wrong way to do it, and then practice the right way to do it, and make a game of it and stuff. How do you practice with your kid when they're regulated? How does that look different with a teenager?
Role playing. Go ahead, Kristen.
No, go ahead. You go first.
No. Okay, well, we just role play a lot. You do it with little kids, and you can do it with teenagers. I've been doing mock job interviews with Victor because he's now looking for another job. And I say, so why did you quit your job at UPS? And then he says, because they were no good. And I say, oh, well, would you like to rephrase that? And then I have to kind of tell him, maybe it would be better if you said this, because then you don't sound like an angry employee. And so you have to kind of coach them and coach them and coach them. And so you just play a lot of different roles as a parent.
Yeah, good stuff. Kristen.
So I was going to say that my kids would never role play. None of my kids. I've had whatever, like role play in a sense of, hey, let's practice this. But I think you just incorporate, you incorporate into the conversation the right way to do it. So, when I'm having a conversation with one of my kids, I would just say, so, how do you think I felt? Then they tell me, or maybe they say, I don't know. And I tell them, and I say, can you think of a better way that you could have said that? Or can you think of a better way that could have been handled? or do you think of a better way that could have went down? And then usually they can. And if they can't, then I would say, well, what I would say is, and then I give my example and then say, do you think that might work for you? Or what do you think about that? That is typically how we would process a situation here. But I also do like a lot of modeling in the moment. So for example, if I get a rude statement or a rude request, I will just say, can you think of a nicer way to say that? And then between yeah, I mean, it is a redo without saying, hey, redo that.
Right, exactly.
And also like between my kids, and I just the other day had a situation where my 17-year-old said something pretty rude to my 15-year-old, but my 15-year-old didn't really hear him. He thought he did. And he said, what'd you say? They were in different rooms and got a little bit like agitated because he thought he heard him, and he probably did, but he didn't fully hear him. So I quickly interjected and I said, what he said was, can you please quiet down? Because it was like, shut the. So what he said was, can you please quiet down? Because he's trying to rest and he has a headache and he's laying on the couch. And the 15-year-old said, oh yeah, sorry, my bad. And, later my 17-year-old came up to me and said, thank you. Thank you for saying that for me, because I was just agitated and I came out wrong. So I think, rephrasing it for them. Sometimes they just need help rephrasing it and processing it and just saying what's a better way that could be done.
Sure.
Plus, it got a totally different reaction out of your other child than probably would have happened if he would have heard his older brother say what he said.
Yes. And I do it with little things all the time too. Like, somebody found an inch of milk in the milk container in the fridge, and like, come on, who did it with the milk again? Who left all this milk? And I said, so what you are trying to say, and then everybody starts getting worked up, like, it wasn't me. I don't know, it wasn't me. And I said, hold on. What we're trying to say here is, hey guys, can you please pay attention to how much liquid is left in a jug before you put it back in the fridge? Because it makes me feel really irritated when I go to grab a beverage and there's nothing left. Like, oh yeah, that's what I meant. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just constant. Like, we just do it all the time. I do it all the time.
That's awesome. That's good. That's good stuff. What has been difficult about when it comes to correcting? Like, I feel like some of our absolute go-to key, tools in correcting are sharing the power that we have as parents by offering choices, making compromises, and that also helps build connection. What's difficult about doing that with a teenager?
I think teenagers, we are used to doing line in the sand kind of thing. Like, nope, you can't do that. I think it's harder to not react immediately and think that they get it. I know with our son, and I'm not sure if it's an IQ thing or if it's a fetal alcohol thing or what it is, but he takes 24 to 48 hours to process almost anything, like big. And so I know that he's not even hearing me if I'm trying to discipline him. But the next day we can sit down and have like an average conversation about what happened, and he can see the point of view a lot better. He had therapy just the other day, and he had a big crisis going on, and his therapist was on Zoom and said, I know you've had a rough day. I'm going to do all the talking and you're just going to listen. And so she did. She talked to him and he listened. And she had emailed me and she's like, well, I tried. But he called me later and said, boy, she talked a lot. But she had some very good points. And this and this and this and this were so true. She's so smart. And I was like, I have been saying the same exact thing over and over again. But it took someone else's point of view. So maybe a mentor even would help. But like, just either a day later or time has to go by to help process those things. And then a second opinion is always good.
Yeah, mentors are huge.
I was going to say that, you said something about like what is most difficult about sharing power. And I think that a lot of parents fear that sharing power means that the parent loses control or loses authority. And if the teenager has power, then it's going to be chaos in the house, so they're not going to listen. But I don't think that's the case. And I think that learning to negotiate and compromise is such an important life skill. For our kids who are externalizers, who are, cussing or shouting or defiant and disrespectful, learning to compromise and negotiate with respect is so important, because really, like, that's kind of what they're doing when they're acting out, is they're trying to compromise or negotiate or get their way. They're trying to get their way. They just don't know how to do it the right way. So teaching them the power of negotiation and compromising and doing so correctly is so important. Because number one, giving them a sense of power, it helps them feel in control, which calms them down ultimately, right?
Yeah.
And then, we have our internalizers, and I have one, my 13-year-old. And, if I tell him to do something, he does it. But if he gets upset about something, he completely shuts down, doesn't say a word, he doesn't say anything. And I want him to talk back to me, say something, like, speak, what are you doing? And sometimes I'll start to, he's come along, he has come a long way too. But sometimes I'll start to say something, then I'll just stop, and I'm like, no, speak. Like, you need to learn how to negotiate. Like, I can compromise with you, talk. Because if kids don't learn that, our externalizers, they're going to get fired because they're shouting and screaming, but our internalizers too are going to get walked all over. They all need to learn how to negotiate and compromise, because we do that in our relationships with our spouses, and in our relationships with our bosses, and in our relationships with our friends. And those are all really important life skills, learning how to do it with respect. So I think the difficult thing is, balancing that you're still the authority and we're afraid we're going to lose power. But that's not, kids know, and if you're the ultimate decision maker, which we are, like, are we going to accept that negotiation? Are we going to accept that compromise? You ultimately do have the power, because you decide if that compromise is appropriate and if that negotiation is acceptable. And, modeling that for them is so important. I'll never forget, at my work right now, I work in a junior high. And I'll never forget, we have this old school ISS teacher, and he said something like, I heard him yelling at a kid like a couple of years ago, and he said something like, just shut up and sit down and get it through your head that you have no power here. Teachers have the power, you have none. And it just made me cringe. Like, that's part of teenagers growing up. Like, they're going to independence. They need to have some power. Like, we don't want to disempower our kids. What message is that sending to them? We have to teach them how to, share power and ask for what they need respectfully. And when they don't get it, how to ask for a compromise. And sometimes there is a place where you just stop. You can't, but when we're teaching them the positive skills, then they're able to accept that better and more easily.
Yeah, that's good. That's good stuff. Thank you, Kristen. One of the other things I wanted to touch on too here, we've only got about 3 minutes left, and then I want to make sure that I have a clean break for everybody, and that you can all go on time here. We don't linger on forever. But one of the other things that I think is important that we recognize, when we talk about correcting, or how we connect with our kids, how we practice, we were kind of talking about that. Kristen, you said your kids wouldn't role play, but what I did hear, and you didn't really say it out loud necessarily, but in terms of how you present it, it's how you related to your kids, right? It's like how you say things, how you present the information. And, I know from my time having been a youth pastor and stuff, like that's what kids always wanted, was somebody who would just talk to them like on their level, like they're an adult. Maybe, yeah, they're not fully ready for that, but they are trying to assert and gain more independence. And they do have usually some more executive functioning going on in that brain, more of it. They're not quite ready for everything. But they want somebody to just talk to them like they're a human being, and not talk down to them like they're 3 or 4. Right. So a lot of it's how you how you say things. And I love, Carrie, you talk about, even role playing with the job interview, like that's so relevant and stuff. Kristen, you mentioned to me, you got 2 minutes here. When it comes to discipline with your kids, like it's, and correcting, like it's still important that we set some clear limits. Carrie, you talked about like, it's not drawing the line in the sand. Like that's typically what we think of or what we do as parents with our teenagers is line in the sand, obey. It's not that strict adherence and line in the sand, but we do have to set clear limits and boundaries. So how do we discipline? What does that look like without giving punishments so that they know maybe you still care about them? What are some examples of maybe some things you've done or how you've handled that?
Yeah, well, when our kids are all new and they come into our house, we have like three very, or it might be four, very general but clear expectations for the house. So we don't give them a whole bunch of rules. We say, the expectations are that you be respectful, which, obviously these kids are, no kids are perfect. They're not going to be perfect, but be respectful. So, respect other people's stuff. We try to talk nice to each other. What are they, Iggy, over there? My husband just walked by to look at him. Be respectful. Don't bring anything illegal in the house, which is a very clear boundary that we tell them. We can't, and we tell them too, because our kids have come older. We can't control what you're doing outside of the house. We can't, and none of us can, but we can set a very clear boundary as to what comes in this house. Nothing comes in this house. And obviously that has been violated a lot of times. And when it comes up, we talk about it. We talk about why it's a safety issue, why it's so important that they follow it. And then, we get rid of the items. And then move forward with school and life. So you do your best in school. If you need help, you ask for help. And you have to move forward. If you're not in school, we expect you to have a job. If kids are not meeting these expectations, we're not grounding them. We're not punishing them. We're sitting down and talking to them about what the problem is. And again, looking at that can't versus won't. It's not that they won't. It's not that they don't want to. Something's getting in the way. So we're going to brainstorm with them. What's getting in the way so we can meet these expectations? Obviously, you need help. Actually, one of the things on our board is if anybody is a threat or a danger to themselves, we're going to get you help. So we're going to call, an ambulance if you need help, or we're going to take you to treatment if you need treatment. If you're hurting yourself, that's a clear indication that you need extra support. So we're going to give you extra support. So we don't consequence our kids, but we do tell them if something's getting in the way, then we're going to address it. So for example, we're not taking away our kids' phone because they're being disrespectful. That doesn't make sense. But if you're not passing your classes and you're on your phone all the time, your phone is going to be put up until you can be successful with your work because it's getting in the way. We're not punishing you. This isn't a consequence. This is structuring your life for success. And actually, my 19-year-old, when he was probably about 17, was so funny. He got real mad at something we were doing, and he's like, "Yeah, you're just punishing me," or I mean, structuring my life for success, and kind of laughed about it, and it was funny. And I said, "I'm not you need to understand. I'm not implementing something to try to make you uncomfortable to teach you a lesson. That's not what it's about. I'm not trying to teach you a lesson, but I am adjusting the structure of life so that you can be successful because you're not right now. It's not about, us trying to control you, because that was his big thing. You're just trying to control me. I'm not trying to control you, but we do need to change the structure so you can be successful. And this is getting in the way. So this has to change."
Yeah. And you said the other day too, when we were talking about that, about even expecting an emotional reaction, and that's okay because they have emotions, and call it the teenage temper tantrum or whatever, that there's nothing you can do to really change that, and that's okay. Just leave them alone, let them cool off. That we are all emotional, and we're upset when things don't go our way as well. So we can expect some of that, and that's not reason to further drop the hammer, right? I love Karen Purvis talks about going after a gnat with an elephant gun, right? Our reaction, our response needs to match what the behavior is. And so we don't, come at disrespect with this, bam, your life is over as you know it kind of a thing. It's no, we don't tolerate disrespect. it is 9:33, and so I'm going to wrap up here, and I'm going to stay on for a few more minutes and take some questions. If Carrie or Kristen want to, that's completely up to you guys. You need to go, that's fine. But one of the things I think also that we often struggle with as parents is, in terms of kids' behavior, is understanding how we respond to it. And within TBRI, they talk about levels of response. And so typically, if we can be playful and fun and engaging in our responses, like that would be, our baseline. That's where we want to be most of the time. And when they come back maybe with some disrespect, or they don't ask the right way, or, hey, give me a glass of milk instead of asking, or something, hey, are you asking or telling? We can be playful with it. But when we go, if they start to be a little bit more obstinate, we've got to be a little bit more structured, a little bit more firm. No, we don't tolerate disrespect. That's not okay. We're going to, give them a chance to try that again, whatever. We're going to be a little bit more structured in it. But when they start losing their minds and, stuff's hitting the fan, like that stuff is the obedience, and that stuff is all out the window. And that our only response in that point in time is to help our children calm down and figure out what it is that they need, what the things are that work with them and for them that can help them to calm down. And we can try and talk about some of those things, in lesser intense moments, and help them practice some of those things. My son, when we first started talking about taking deep breaths to calm down, like he was so anti that, did not want to do that at all. And when we started to raise his level of awareness on his anxiety and other things and where he's feeling on stuff, and now he's beginning to like just do that on his own, because we've talked about it enough over years and years of, like, this is what you need to do, and that's what this is, and that's what this emotion is, and here's how you can, counteract that and stuff. So, and certainly some of you I know have had to go into a protective response where it's protecting others in the home, protecting yourselves. I know Kristen has, and I think Carrie even, both you guys have had to deal with some of that in your kids going off to residential or into hospitalizations because of behaviors as well. So there can be a lot of intense things that come along with parenting kids that have been through some really difficult pasts and difficult traumas. But know that there is, you're not alone in that. One of the things why I wanted to ask Kristen and Carrie here to share is like just their perspectives and experience, to know that, they're facing similar things as you're facing. And they just keep going at it and keep trying to do the right things over and over and over. Last thing I'll leave you with, Bonnie asked a question early on, how do you deal with what seems like no behavior progress in years, and maybe even decline over the last year? Certainly one of the things that I think we have to recognize is the time that we're in right now is just a very odd time. And the course of the last 3 months or so, whatever that's been, is just very bizarre for all of us, very stressful for all of us. And what we often see in our teenagers, again, isn't necessarily what you can't take it on for face value, I guess is what I'm getting at, right? There's usually something that's driving that behavior, whatever it is that you're seeing. I would say, work on the connection, focus on that. And, meet those physical needs and sensory needs, and get out for some exercise and walks and do that with them. And then go from there. So I'll stay on and take a few questions if anybody has any questions they want to share. Otherwise, we're already a little bit over our time. And so I want to thank you guys for joining us, and let you guys go and say goodnight. So thank you so much. If you have a question, you can type it in the chat there to myself or to everyone, whatever you're comfortable with. And I will take a look at any of those things if anybody wants to stay on and has any specifics they'd like to talk about or ask. And if not, this could be really quiet and really boring, really. we did a Q&A about TBRI a few weeks ago, and it was pretty quiet right at the beginning. And I said, hey, I want you guys to know this is a Q&A. If you don't have any questions, this is going to be boring and quick, and I'm going to get off and I'm going to go watch some Netflix or something. So if you got questions, now's the time to ask them. Bill asked, what advice would you give to new foster parents, Kristen?
Learn about TBRI. If you haven't read, I would recommend Ross Green's information and also Heather Forbes' Beyond Consequences. Those are my two big ones that I really like for teenagers. I would seriously focus on connection for a long time first. And I'm going to say the opposite of what a lot of people think. We tend to I don't know if it's an old school mentality or just different situation mentality, but give them all the rules and all the structure right at the beginning, because then you can loosen up later and it'll be easier. But I don't think that's how it works with these kids. Like I said, we have our basic expectations and this is, for older kids. I might have a different view for kids who are younger, but we have our very basic expectations. And as time goes on, we do add more expectations as kids can handle it. Our 19-year-old would never have handled us taking away his phone in the beginning, ever, never would have happened, ever. Or telling him he couldn't go out, ever. So our really basic expectation for him, based on his background and where he was coming from, was just let us know where you are. Just answer your phone if we call, and don't bring anything illegal in the house. It's really simple. Just communicate with us and keep what you're doing out of the house, out of the house. And then as time went on, we did put more stuff on him we were able to raise our expectations. And we did, in the end up taking his phone for certain things. When we found out he was selling drugs and doing some really serious behaviors, we paid for the phone. So we said, we're not going to pay for this phone anymore. And we were able to actually take it, but it never would have happened in the beginning. It took a good, I don't know, six months before I could even touch his phone. So, with those kids, I really like the connection and showing up for them. I think that's the most important, is just doing what you say you're going to do and showing up. I don't know how many school meetings, IEP meetings, rehab intake meetings and everything that I went to that made a huge difference in him trusting me.
Bill's got something to say too. Go ahead, Bill. I'll unmute you here, I think. There.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you. I have a unique perspective because I actually came from foster care system 30 years ago. I aged out at the age of 18. So the anger when it comes to the teenagers and everything that I was in there from the age of 9 to the age of 18. So I can actually look at these teenagers that were going to be getting into our household and actually look at them and say, I know exactly how you feel because I've got the t-shirt to prove it. So my biggest thing is, me and my wife, in her regards, she's a smaller woman than I am. I'm 6 foot 300 pounds, so I'm not. For them to physically do stuff to me is not going to be easy at all. But how do you deal with the outbursts? Because I know how it was 30 years ago when I was in the foster care system in regards to restraining the children and everything like that. How is that in regards now, especially with the trauma induced? Because I don't want to add to the trauma, but at the same time, I don't want to lose everything in my house because somebody goes off half-cocked.
I'm fairly small. I'm like 5'3", and my teenagers are big. So my big boy that I talk about a lot is 6'5", and he's pushing 300 pounds. I think the last time he weighed in, he was 290. My current 17-year-old is 6'5", and he's about 220. My 15-year-old is almost 6 feet tall. So my kids are all big. My oldest one has had the most issues with his anger and with his mood and mental health. And he is very appropriately diagnosed as bipolar, manic aggressive bipolar. And so when he would get mad and flip out, he would flip out. We only have 2 holes in our walls from him over almost 3 years. And it took a long time for them to get there. It took probably over a year before they happened. But honestly, I've never, ever, ever, ever feared for my safety with any of my kids. And I think the thing is that you just give them space. I never would get in my kids' faces. I would never try to force them to do something. Again, as time went on and I built the trust with my biggest boy, it was different. And I would push him a little further because we had that trust. And I knew that even in his, most manic cycle, he trusted me, so he wouldn't act out on me. But in the beginning I didn't. And so I kept my space, and there were times where he, destroyed his room. And like I said, there's a couple holes in the wall. He would typically leave when he would get really worked up. He'd walk out of the house. So I think that you just don't get in their face, don't get in their space. You give them time and space. It's, and I have to add too that before we became foster parents, I worked at a summer camp for kids with severe emotional and behavior disorders in New York for 7 summers in a row. And I was never hit by a kid there either. And we had to restrain kids sometimes. It was a hands-on camp where if kids were in danger, we would have to do that. But I think that 99.9% of the physical aggression can be avoided if you just get out of their space.
Yeah, because I know anger-wise, I had my own issues. I went through 12 foster homes in 6 months because of my anger issues, because of abandonment, because of how I was, the whole situation, why I was in the foster care system. So that's what worries me in regards, because like I said, my wife is smaller than I am, and I don't want her getting hurt. But I have faith in God, and also that, and hopefully these teenagers, that they're not going to do that to them. But it's just being the man of the house like I am, I just, not to be sexist, but just I wanted to make sure there's enough control in that house that there's not going to be a huge thing. So
Can I just say thank you. Thank you for sharing. Your perspective is very valuable, and I appreciate you sharing your background a little bit. Carrie, I was actually going to ask if you guys have had that in your home, if you had aggression and stuff, and how you guys dealt with it.
Just a little. Okay.
I mean, we deal with severe PTSD, and you can't predict when someone is going to be triggered. And we are, after 5 years, still finding out triggers. And those triggers, the first 3.5 years led to extreme rage. Rage in the form of, we took CPI classes so that we could properly restrain, because it wasn't safe for any of us. My husband is larger than me. I had a really hard time. But there have been times where he's had to lay on top of him on the floor while I called the police to help. And but for the most part, it was, we have had furniture flipping rage, but now that rage has simmered, he's a runner. He used to run away, but I always followed him, sometimes in my bare feet, because I had to get out the door quickly. And now we trust that he knows the neighborhood well enough where he just walks. And if he's upset, we just let him go, and he walks. And find my iPhone is good advice. But there was a couple of months ago, it was still cold. He put 100,000 steps on his Fitbit. And that's how much he has to walk to stay regulated some days. But we just have to let him do what he needs to do to get regulated. And that might be hours in the basement pacing with very loud music on, and it might be just going for a walk. But I think you have to find the outlet for the rage in order for it not to be destructive, which is very hard and might take a long time. But they have to know that if they run, you're going to follow, because he would look back like, don't follow me. you know, they want to know that you're still there. And I think that's part of the connection that you're building in the beginning.
And just one last question. I know other people had questions, and I apologize for taking the time away from them, but what about pets and the teenagers? How does that usually interaction-wise?
We have 2 dogs that we got post-adoption. I am not a dog person, but they've been extremely therapeutic for all of us. We got them as therapy for our son, but they've been therapy for my husband and myself also, just because they are very intuitive. He's never hurt an animal. He's never, I guess to go back and answer your other question, he's never come at me as the mom. He usually would only rage if Mike was home, which was interesting to me. Mike was always worried about, I can't go anywhere, I can't ever leave. But I said, it's not Mike causing the rage. It's just, I think that he never,
the alpha male.
He just never did it while only I was home. And I don't know why necessarily, but it just, I don't know. But yeah, I think you just have to.
I think I'm starting to make you think about stuff in that regards. What about you?
I want to echo what you said too. We've never had an issue. We have 2 dogs, and we've never had an issue with any aggression towards our pets. I think that if we did have a child who's aggressive towards our pets, we probably would have to tell the agency that the child needed to be in a home without pets. But we've had, 10 kids in this home, and none of them have ever even come close to hurting the dog. Actually, that's not true. Our 15-year-old was playing a little too rough and the dog yelped. And we were like, dude, calm down. But it was not aggressive. We had a real big dog that passed away last summer, and he slept in every single kid in this house's bed. Like, everybody loved that dog. So I agree, dogs can be very therapeutic. And I also just want to, also echo what Carrie said about the police. We have called the police before, and I never felt in danger, but I felt like our teenager was out of his mind. I just felt like he was, manic and spiraling. So we did call, and we did, at one point it did lead to a hospitalization. His other hospitalization was actually coming out of rehab. But there were several times. Once I was in the car with him and I pulled over and called, and he wasn't attacking me, he wasn't hurting me, but he was making statements that were really concerning. And I just felt like we needed other intervention. And we tell our kids that from the beginning, like, if we ever are afraid for your safety or anybody else's, we're going to call the police, not because we want you to get you in trouble, but because we need to keep everybody safe. And that's what the police are for. And, the police kind of know our family here, which I think is a good thing, to establish a relationship. Like, we did have in the very beginning a bad experience with the police where I told them, like, my kid is he's not like being a criminal right now, but he needs like mental health help. So when you come in this house, I don't want you to attack him. I want you to, this is what we need. And they came in and they did the opposite. And it was really terrible. But the other situation where I had to call, it was beautiful. And the cops were so helpful. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that. I want to read what Laura said down there. She said, when we try to give time and space, my 15-year-old targets myself and my husband. We try to leave him alone, but he follows us and gets aggressive to get a reaction. If that ever happened to me, honestly, I would tell the child that I'm going to my room to take space for myself, and I would lock the door. And if he were hitting the door or banging on the door, I would call the police. And again, not to get him in trouble, but because I just feel like, you need an outside intervention. If I had a family friend to call that I thought could diffuse, maybe I would call them too. But I would take it to, getting another individual there to try to diffuse. I actually had this conversation with a friend, and I suggested, could you get in the shower? Like, could you get in the shower? Your kid's not going to follow you in the shower, right? Like, could you just say, hey, I'm going to get in the shower, and, do that? Or, I don't know if it would work to then say, hey, I'm going to go for a bike ride. Go ahead and follow me. Let's go. And then everybody is going to get some physical exercise. Or I'm going to go for a run. Come on, follow me. Then we're redirecting all that energy into something positive that hopefully could de-escalate the whole situation.
We have used food again, but like if he was going off and we had a watermelon on the counter, I'd walk in the kitchen very calmly and just start cutting up the watermelon without even saying one word. And he would come in and sit at the counter and put a piece of watermelon in his mouth. And little by little, his mood just went like this. And all was well in the world as soon as he ate all that watermelon. And I don't know why food does that. It's blood sugar probably. But yeah, like when I have had to call the police a few times, it was because we didn't know how long it was going to last. And we were I would say to Mike, how long can you do this yet? And he would be like, you need to call. And then I would always say, please, no lights, no sirens, just come to my door. All we need is some support. We don't need you taking him anywhere. We need you to help us get his meds in him because then he'll sleep. but it's just, you just have to kind of do what you need to do to be safe for everyone. And if you can figure out a way to do that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Even thinking about the nutrition aspect, the empowering aspect of food and hydration and stuff with our kids, even in those moments of where they're, getting really dysregulated and aggressive and stuff, and how that can still potentially be a help in those moments. I was thinking myself, with the weather getting nice and stuff, I see Laura already responded. I love bike rides, things like, yeah, the weather getting nice, like that's going for a walk, getting outside and doing some physical activity can always be helpful for our kids. We have a trampoline in our yard, and sometimes we tell the kids, like, go out and you can walk or jump, like which one do you want to do? And that's giving them the choice. And we're okay with either one of them. It's no ultimatum, but it's like walk or jump. Which one do you want to do to just get some of that out? I think it's so hard for us in those circumstances to not be triggered and not to come back with our own almost violent, but really, reaction in terms of our voice. It's not that we're going to try and be violent with the child, but even how we are responding. Are we yelling? Is our voice sound aggressive to those things? Because that can be really, really, really difficult. And Catherine Watts asked a question in there. And Catherine, do you mind clarifying? Can I unmute you and you can kind of clarify what you were asking there? Because I didn't quite understand. You say, go ahead. There you go.
Wait. Okay. So one of the things that we have an older sibling with us, and she's very mothering, and so hey buddy, I need you.
Gotcha. So you're talking about an older sibling who's mothering the other siblings?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so a lot of times the control is it's a very hard struggle for control. Mama's okay.
Yeah.
And
Hi, Bill.
that is very buddy, hold on. I'm so sorry.
Sure. No, that's okay. I think the first thing that comes to my mind in recognizing that too is that the control aspect is definitely a fairly typical thing of firstborn children anyway. Now you take away the control that they've had in their life leading up to that point, and that older one has had that experience longer than the other ones. That control becomes a very, very important issue. And so offering those choices and being able to help them learn how to make compromises with you, compromise is helping to make a third choice. And sometimes you can say yes as the mom, and sometimes the answer is still going to be no on compromises, but helping to come up and formulate with another choice, I think will be key. I think I've seen that be fairly typical too, where sometimes they've had to be the mom. And so they don't know how not to be. They've had to be the mom out of survival. And so you've got all those different things going on. And I think from what I know and Kristen can chime in on this as well, but I think it's just kind of, they need a constant reassurance that they don't have to be the mom. Like, I'm the mom. I'm okay. I'm going to keep you all safe. I'm going to, make sure everybody's got what they need. If you need something, like, I'm here to help make sure you get what you need. You don't have to be the mom. You can play, and it's probably just going to be this constant, like, loop coming out of your mouth. It feels like it's never ending. But it's going to have to be probably that way for a long time before it starts to begin to sink in. Kristen, do you have anything?
I haven't ever had that experience personally.
Okay.
My siblings, the only kids I have that are biological siblings, don't, I mean, a little bit, but not as much as what it seems like you're describing. But I think that what Jason's saying is exactly right. Having that external dialogue all the time and reminding them all the time, this is what a mom does. I'm the mom. You have to let me do this because I'm the mom. This is what a mom does. And, you're the kid, so this is what you can do. And I appreciate your help. Thank you so much. You did such a good job taking care of your siblings. I can tell you really love her, but I'm the mom, so you got to let me do this. I think that's important and powerful for a kid to hear that. What are the roles supposed to be? Let's say it out loud.
Mm.
And while also, appreciating, the fact that is likely a survival skill, and that she does love her siblings and is trying to care for them, in whatever way that she is.
Yeah. That's a tough one for sure. It's one of those ones that just doesn't go away very quickly at all.
And she might not know what else to do. So it might have to be a dialogue with her, and then here's what you could do. Like, you could do this, because if she's been doing it for that long and that's like her, maybe she doesn't know how to play, or she doesn't know how to, but helping her and redirecting her to something that she can do at that same time. It's my random 2 thoughts.
Yeah, good stuff. Any other questions? I see Matt wrote something down there. Well, it says Matt, but I'm assuming it might be Jill. We know Matt and Jill, who are up in the Milwaukee area now from a long time ago.
Matt's was more in response to the comment about the child following, a teenager following you when you're trying to give them time and space, which I think is really insightful. He said, sometimes I think there's an internal battle between wanting space, what they are saying, but deeply wanting to be by you. I think that's so true. That's so true.
Yeah.
I agree with having.
It can be quite a bit of a dance, right? In terms of like trying to figure out what actually works with this kid and what they need. And you do the best you can in those moments. And, you hopefully you start to pay attention and learn, like, okay, well, this didn't go very well last time, so I'm not going to do that this time. Let's try something different, and see how that goes. That may blow up in your face too, but that you keep trying and figuring out, something different to do, because maybe they do want to stay close. One of the things we've done with our kids now, we've got one that's about to be 13, so almost a teenager, but we've told them, like, when they're dysregulated, like, and we're, our downstairs is basically like kind of one big area, one big room. You can kind of see everybody from just about anywhere, but it's like, you're going to go sit down over here until you can chill, like, so that we're still within, still within sight of each other and can see each other, But like, dude, like that's not okay. And we need to take a little time out here just to kind of chill. And we're right here when you're ready. You want to come back. But that's also where they're not like aggressively coming after us either. That's I'm really upset and I need to calm down kind of a thing. So there's definitely some differences between where you've got to go and what you can do. And if they're being aggressive, that's a whole nother thing. Any other questions? Sibling parent issue. I think that also saying that you have been the parent and protector of these kids. Yes. So going back to the mothering aspect, Iggy has given some good insight there. Here to do the same thing, and you don't have to do that. You don't have to carry that load. You don't have to carry that burden. You can go play, be a kid. But yeah, they like Cheryl's point, like they likely might not know how to play, might not have had that opportunity to play. They've had to be the parent because the parent wasn't there. So, well, thank you guys. Thank you all for being on. Appreciate it and appreciate the questions and the interactions. We're hoping to do some more nurture group calls in the future here, which will give you some structured activities to go through with your kids and reason to practice some things. And I'd like to do another one of these calls where we can focus a little bit more on connecting with your teenager as well. So be looking for some of those things. And thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. You guys have a good night.
You too.
Thanks,
Thank
you too.